I wasn't supposed to witness it. I wasn't supposed to film it. But the camera never lies. The NFL buried the footage of Rihanna's Super Bowl ritual, and I know exactly why. What I saw that night wasn't just a performance, it was something else. Something dark. And they didn't want anyone to know what had really happened on that stage, but I saw it. I filmed it. And I can't keep quiet anymore. I'm just a cameraman. That's how I saw myself anyway. A guy behind the lens, doing the dirty work that makes the magic happen for everyone else. I was part of the team for big events, filming concerts, shows, whatever needed a camera to record it. I'd been behind the scenes of Super Bowl performances before, and none of them were any different. Just another big event. Get the angles, film the stars, wrap it up. But that night, the night of Rihanna's Super Bowl halftime show, was different. It didn't start out that way, of course. At first, it was just like any other night until I saw what I wasn't supposed to see. This happened in 2023. Rihanna had made her big return to the stage after years of being out of the spotlight. Everyone knew it would be huge, but what they didn't know was that it wouldn't just be a performance. It would be something more, a ritual, really, though no one would ever say that out loud. Not until now. I wasn't part of Rihanna's inner circle, but I was there, backstage, doing what I did best, capturing the event, getting the shots. The buzz backstage was electric. The staff was moving fast, preparing for the show, and everyone was excited for the performance. But I noticed something almost immediately. Something that didn't feel right. It wasn't the usual pre-show jitters. It was more than that. It felt like there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air, a heaviness that no one was acknowledging. Rihanna had just finished her rehearsal, and everyone was already getting set up for the live performance. The crew was moving quickly, almost too quickly, but no one was talking. They were all focused, hyper-focused on what was about to happen, and yet there was this quiet, almost uncomfortable urgency in their movements. It wasn't the usual backstage energy that came with the excitement of a big performance. There was a layer of unease buried under the surface. And then there was Rihanna herself. I've seen her up close before, at events, and she usually exudes an energy that makes the room light up. But that night, she was different. Her team was readying her for the performance, but she wasn't the vibrant, confident artist I expected. She was distant, focused. Her demeanor wasn't casual like I'd seen her before. It was like she was preparing for something else, something more than a halftime show, something deeper. I saw it in her eyes, the way she looked at her team, the way she barely spoke. She was almost in a trance, but no one seemed to mention it. No one said a word about it. But it was there, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just another show. I thought maybe I was reading too much into it. After all, the pressure of the Super Bowl, the attention, the energy, it could do that to you. But I wasn't the only one who noticed. There were little things, whispers, side glances from the crew, the tech team who usually moved like clockwork. But tonight, they were jumpy. Not in a way that screamed panic, but in a way that was subtle. Like they knew something was about to happen, but they weren't sure how to process it. I was standing in the corner adjusting my camera for the best angles when I overheard a conversation between two crew members. One of them was nervously asking if the ritual would be happening. The other just nodded. But the way they said it, it wasn't casual. It wasn't just a joke. They were serious. I froze in place, listening to them whisper about the ritual and how everything had to go perfectly. I wasn't sure what they meant, but the weight in their voices made me uneasy. This wasn't just a performance. There was something else going on. I didn't have time to dwell on it. The show was starting soon, and my job was to get the best footage. But as I stood there, watching the crew move around Rihanna's dressing room, something caught my eye. A man, tall with dark sunglasses, standing just outside the door. He wasn't a member of the usual crew. I could tell from the way he moved, the way he stood like he was guarding something. But he wasn't just guarding the room. He was watching it, like he was waiting for something to happen. His gaze was intense, focused, but there was something off about him. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I didn't want to stare either. It felt like he was staring through me. And the moment I made eye contact, he looked away, like he knew I wasn't supposed to see him. I shook my head and tried to get back to my work, but that feeling stayed with me. I thought about the man for a moment, but then I saw Rihanna step out of her dressing room and everything else faded. The show was about to begin, and this was it. The moment the world had been waiting for. The stadium roared, the lights blazed, and Rihanna took the stage. For a moment, I forgot about the unease, forgot about the strange things I had seen backstage. The performance was electric, the crowd was wild, and I captured every second of it. But as I filmed, something in the back of my mind kept whispering that this wasn't just another show. It wasn't just a performance. There was something deeper, something I wasn't supposed to see. Rihanna moved across the stage, commanding the crowd with her every step. But as I watched her, I saw something strange. The lights around her seemed to flicker in a way that didn't match the rhythm of the performance. There was a subtle shift in the air, like the sound had changed. The music felt distorted for a split second. The camera caught it, distortion. But it was gone before I could truly understand what had happened. It wasn't a glitch. It was something else. A visual distortion that felt like it was too real. But no one seemed to notice. Not the crowd, not the crew, and definitely not Rihanna. It was all so subtle, like no one was willing to acknowledge the shift. The show went on. The lights blazed. The crowd screamed in joy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. As the roar of the crowd filled the stadium, I moved to the side, trying to stay out of the way of the tech crew and the production team. The energy was high, intense, but there was also a strange calmness to it. Everyone knew the magnitude of this performance, and everyone was doing their job, but there was something off about the air. I had been in enough high-stress environments to know when things weren't quite right. This wasn't the usual nervous excitement of a show. This was different. It felt almost like anticipation, but not just for the performance. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite identify. But I knew it was there. I could see it in the crew's eyes. They were all focused on the stage, but there was a flicker of something in their faces. Fear, maybe, or anxiety. It was subtle, hidden under the layers of professionalism, but it was there, and it wasn't the kind of fear that came from nerves. It was something more primal, like they were afraid of something they didn't understand. Some of them even glanced over their shoulders like they were looking for something or someone in the shadows. The hallway behind me felt darker than it should have. It wasn't a physical darkness. It was something in the atmosphere. It felt like there was something just out of reach, something lurking, but no one wanted to acknowledge it. The hum of the stadium, the lights, the energy, everything was so overwhelming that for a moment I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was the pressure, the hype. The event was huge. Rihanna's return to the stage after years of silence. It was the Super Bowl. Of course, there'd be nerves. The camera crew was buzzing, everyone moving in sync to get the best shots. And I was just another part of the machine. Get the angles, capture the magic, and then get out. Simple. But the closer I got to the action, the more that sense of unease crept back into my chest. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't the performers, it was the people backstage. There was a heaviness in their body language, a tension in their posture that I hadn't noticed before. Usually everyone was buzzing with excitement, chatting with each other, but tonight was different. The air felt thick with unspoken thoughts. They were all too still, too careful in their movements, like they were bracing for something that had nothing to do with the show. I kept my distance from the other crew members, trying not to draw attention to myself. My camera was ready, my job was clear, and I knew that the moment Rihanna hit the stage, it would all click into place. But even as I looked around, I noticed how the crew was moving with such urgency, but also with hesitation. There was something about the way they handled the equipment, something in the way they checked everything twice, maybe 3 times, as if they were making sure things were just right, but they weren't. Something was missing. The energy, the buzz of a live show wasn't there. And I felt it more acutely as I walked deeper into the wings. There was a door. Not just any door, a door I hadn't noticed before, tucked behind a set of drapes at the back of the stage. It wasn't part of the usual backstage layout. It wasn't on the plans. And it wasn't marked as any kind of emergency exit or storage room. It stood there, almost hidden. But in the dim light, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was drawing me in. I couldn't explain it. My feet wanted to move toward it, even though I had no reason to. It wasn't my job to open doors or investigate. I had my task, film the show, capture the performance. But that door, sitting there, tucked away from view, felt like it was calling me. I forced myself to focus. This was nothing. A part of the set, a hidden entrance, a mistake in the layout. I couldn't afford to get distracted, but every time I looked at the door, I could feel it drawing me in. Something about it felt wrong, but the sound of the crowd cheered me on. It was starting. Rihanna was about to hit the stage. I turned and made my way toward the main stage, getting into position. The buzz in the air increased as the performance was about to begin. The lights dimmed. The cameras were all set, waiting for the cue to start rolling. But there was still that unease in the air. It felt like the stadium was holding its breath, as if everyone knew something big was about to happen, but they didn't know what. Rihanna stepped onto the stage, her silhouette framed by the spotlights. The crowd erupted. This was it, the moment the world had been waiting for. But as I lifted the camera, something caught my eye. Something wasn't right. She looked perfect, of course. She always did. But there was something in her eyes that was different. She was calm, but too calm. Her face was expressionless, like she was detached from the performance. She wasn't smiling like I expected. Her body moved fluidly, but there was no energy in her steps. There was no fire behind her movements, no electricity that usually followed her every motion. She was too still, like she was going through the motions, like she was waiting for something that hadn't come yet. I zoomed in on her face, but the camera seemed to focus on something else, something in the background. I quickly adjusted the lens, thinking it was a glitch, but it was more than that. As I focused on the shot, I saw it. The shadows. Not just normal stage shadows, but something else, something moving behind the stage. It was quick, but I saw it clear enough to make my heart stop. The movement was unnatural, like the shadows themselves were alive, swirling, shifting, and pulsating in ways they shouldn't. I looked around the stage, but no one else seemed to notice. The crew was still focused on their tasks. The crowd was lost in the music, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building. Something wasn't right. And then, the lights flickered. Not just flickering. It wasn't a technical malfunction. It was more like calling. The lights dimmed, then blazed to life again, brighter than before. But the intensity was too much. The light wasn't just lighting up the stage. It was alive, vibrating in the air, pulsing with every beat of the music. The lights flashed in sync with Rihanna's movements, almost like she was controlling them. But she wasn't. She wasn't doing anything. Her body was moving in time with the music. But her eyes were staring straight ahead, lost, unblinking. I adjusted the camera again, trying to refocus. But something in the footage didn't match what I was seeing with my own eyes. The shapes in the background were shifting again, and I swore. Just for a moment, I saw something stand in the shadows. A figure, tall, not human. I tried to shake it off. I was getting caught up in the moment. I was a professional. I had to stay focused. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The air felt like it was thickening, like it was becoming heavier. And the further I zoomed in on Rihanna, the more I noticed how detached she was. She wasn't just performing for the crowd. She was in a trance, lost in whatever was happening behind her eyes. But what I saw next was beyond anything I could ever have imagined. The strange feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger the longer I stood there, behind the lens of my camera. It was like the room was closing in on me, the walls pressing in, the air thick with something that didn't belong. It was more than just unease. It was wrongness. Something I couldn't explain, but something I knew I needed to escape from. I turned my attention back to Rihanna on stage. She was still moving, still singing, but now I saw it even clearer. There was something off about her. She was performing, yes, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the energy I expected. There was no fire behind her eyes, no intensity in her movements. It was like she was there, but she wasn't there at the same time. Like she was going through the motions, but her mind wasn't in it. The crowd was chanting her name, shouting for more, but the connection between her and the audience, it was distant. I watched her carefully, but the feeling of unease settled deeper into my gut. My camera kept zooming in on her face, but each time I checked the footage, it seemed like something was missing. The performance wasn't adding up. Her movements were stiff, robotic at times, like she wasn't leading the performance. but being led by something else, something beyond her control. The crowd was still hyped, still dancing, cheering, lost in the spectacle, but I couldn't help but notice the shift. The energy was off, not just in the performance, but in the crowd as well. I hadn't seen it earlier, but now it was impossible to ignore. The audience had turned from excited to obsessed. The way they moved, how they responded to every beat, it was too uniform. They weren't just reacting to Rihanna anymore. They were reacting to something else, something that wasn't on stage. I wasn't the only one noticing it. There was a shift among the crew too. Their eyes were locked on the stage, but they weren't focused on the performance anymore. They were watching something else, and that something felt dangerous. But as I adjusted the camera, trying to capture the perfect shot, I noticed something else, something far stranger than what was unfolding on stage. I was standing near the side of the stage, close to the entrance that led to the backstage area. I had the perfect angle, but something kept pulling my eyes back to a small, unmarked door off to the side. It had been there the entire time, but I hadn't noticed it until now. The lighting in that area was dim, but there was a faint red glow around the door frame, like it was calling me, urging me to look closer. The door was locked. I had seen the crew walk past it a few times, but no one seemed to pay it any attention. Yet, it wasn't like the other backstage doors. Those were all designed for the staff, for quick access to the different parts of the venue. But this door, it felt different. It was out of place. Something about it felt wrong. The tension in the air seemed to thicken the longer I stared at it, like there was something behind it that I wasn't supposed to see. I couldn't stop looking at it, and as I turned back to check the crowd, I caught sight of a guest, someone who didn't seem like they belonged. They were standing off to the side, looking in my direction, but they weren't looking at the stage, at Rihanna, or at anyone else. No, they were looking at the locked door. Their gaze was fixed, like they knew something I didn't. At first, I thought maybe they were just another guest caught up in the excitement. But as I watched them more closely, I saw it. Their eyes, wide and unblinking, were staring at the door like it held the answers to something they'd been waiting for. There was a strange intensity in their gaze, a knowing. I stepped back, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine, but it only grew stronger the longer I stood there. I couldn't pull my focus away from the door. I could feel something moving in the air, something that was being pulled toward that door. It was as if the entire atmosphere had shifted, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I turned back toward Rihanna. She was still going through the motions of her performance, but now I saw it more clearly. Her movements weren't fluid. They were jagged, sharp, like she was fighting against something, or like she was being controlled by something. But the worst part? It was the way the crowd was reacting to her. They weren't just cheering, they were chanting, and not in the way you would expect. Their chant was slow, rhythmic. It was almost like a ritual, like they were trying to summon something. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a language I didn't recognize. I turned again toward the locked door. The guest was still there, staring, their body tense, like they were waiting for something to happen. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to shake it off. I was overthinking it. This was just another show. The energy was high, the crowd was hyped, and it was easy to get caught up in all of it. But the more I looked around, the more I realized something was off. It wasn't just Rihanna. It wasn't just the crowd. It was everything. And then I saw it. The guests didn't move at first, but as soon as the lights flickered again, they stepped forward. Slowly, like they had been waiting for that moment. Their eyes were still locked on the door. It wasn't just them. The crew around me started to move too, but their movements were strange, almost mechanical. They were no longer in sync with the usual rhythm of the show. It wasn't just about the performance anymore. It was like they were preparing for something else, something I couldn't understand. I heard whispers from behind me, crew members muttering in low voices about the ritual. What ritual? What were they talking about? I tried to keep my focus. The performance was still going on. Rihanna was on stage, moving like she was in some kind of trance, but I couldn't focus. The locked door, the guest, the whispers. It was all pulling me in, but I couldn't explain why. And then it hit me. The ritual, it wasn't a performance anymore. Rihanna wasn't just singing. She was conducting something far darker. And the door, that door was the key. But that was just the beginning. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. The closer I got to the action, the more I felt like I was standing on the edge of something dark, something I wasn't supposed to understand. I kept my eyes fixed on Rihanna, still moving through the motions of her performance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't really there. She wasn't really in the moment anymore. It was as if she was being pulled through it, as if the crowd was feeding off of her energy, but she wasn't in control of it. The lights flickered again, more violently this time. Not like a technical malfunction, but like the lights were struggling to stay on. They pulsed with every beat, like they were alive, responding to something unseen, something behind the performance. I glanced around, trying to find some explanation for what was happening, but no one was reacting. The crew was still moving in that strange, hurried way, eyes darting around, never looking directly at anything. They all had that same anxious, fearful expression that had started earlier in the night. And then I saw it. In the corner of the stage, near the wings, there was a flicker of movement. A shadow. It was quick, but it was there. It wasn't part of the set. It wasn't part of the crew. I couldn't place it, but it looked like someone or something was standing just out of the spotlight. The shadow was too tall, too elongated. It didn't belong in the space. My heart skipped a beat. I raised my camera, adjusting the focus, but the shadow was gone by the time I had the lens on it. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I'd seen things like this before. Glitches in the light, odd reflections, shadows that seemed to move. But this was different. This felt real. This wasn't a trick of the eye. It was something tangible. Something I could feel in my chest, pressing against my ribs like the air around me was thickening. I turned my attention back to Rihanna. She was still in the center of the stage, her body moving, her voice drifting into the crowd. But now, it was different. Her movements were jerky, erratic, like she wasn't controlling them. She had this vacant expression on her face, like she was locked in a trance. And that's when I saw it, the thing I couldn't ignore. It was in her eyes, her pupils. They were gone. I don't mean to say they were just dilated or that there was something wrong with her vision. Number. I mean, that they were empty, black, hollow, like she wasn't even there anymore. I don't know how long I stared at her, but it felt like hours. My camera was still rolling, but I couldn't look away from her. The energy in the room shifted. The music was still blasting, but the crowd's cheers were fading into this low hum. It was as if everything was muffled, distant. I could still see the people jumping, screaming, dancing, but the sound didn't match their movements. It was like the sound had changed, shifted somehow, until all I could hear was that low, rhythmic pulse, not from the music, but from the people, from the stage. And that's when it hit me. The crowd wasn't just reacting to Rihanna. They were reacting to something else. It wasn't just the show. It wasn't just the performance. The crowd wasn't just excited anymore. They were controlled. Their movements were synchronized, like they were being pulled into some kind of collective trance. I couldn't explain it, but they weren't just watching the performance. They were feeding on it, feeding on her. My camera caught it all, but I couldn't focus. I couldn't keep my hands steady as I filmed the crowd, their eyes wide, their faces twisted in strange, painful expressions. They were all so still, frozen in their movement, but their bodies were jerking in unnatural ways, like they were puppets on strings, each one moving in time with the flicker of the lights, with the pulse of the sound. I stepped back from the camera, my heart racing. The air around me was suffocating now. It wasn't just the energy from the crowd. It was something else. The whole arena felt alive, like it was breathing, like the walls were pulsing with something unseen. The pressure in the air made it hard to breathe, hard to focus, hard to think. And then I saw it again. The figure, the shadow. But this time, it wasn't just a flicker in the corner of my eye. It was standing right in front of the locked door, the one I'd been staring at earlier. But it wasn't just a shadow. It was physical. It was tall, taller than anyone should have been. Its shape was all wrong. Its body seemed to distort and shift, like the space around it couldn't contain it. It was like it was made of darkness, but not just any darkness. This wasn't the kind of shadow you'd see from a light bulb or a person standing in the way of a beam. No, this shadow was alive. It had substance. It had depth. It was reaching, stretching, like it was trying to break through the very fabric of the stage. I froze. I couldn't move. My body locked in place. I tried to bring the camera back to my face, but my hands were shaking too badly. I couldn't hold it steady anymore. I had to blink. I had to look away. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. I looked back at the crowd. The people were still moving, but it wasn't normal. It wasn't human movement anymore. It was like they were being pulled to something, drawn into something. The music was louder now, blaring through the speakers, but the growl from earlier, the low sound, was still there. It was in the crowd. It was in the ground. It was everywhere, and I could feel it in my bones. Rihanna was still on stage, still singing, but now she wasn't just moving. She was commanding them. Her arms were raised, her body twisted, jerking in ways that didn't seem human. She wasn't performing. She was controlling them. The crowd's chant grew louder. It wasn't a chant of excitement anymore. It was a chant of command, of summoning. It wasn't just words anymore. It was something deeper, something ancient. I had to stop filming. I had to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. My body was still. It was like I couldn't move at all, like the air was holding me there. And then, as the lights flickered once more, I heard it. The sound that pierced the silence. A whisper. You shouldn't have seen this. Then came the real shock. I didn't know what to do. My body was still frozen in place, my feet stuck to the floor. Even though every part of me was screaming to run, I didn't know what was happening. It didn't make sense. How could something so real feel so wrong? The music was still blaring, the crowd still screaming, but it felt distant now, like the sound was coming from far away. I could still hear the deep growl vibrating through the stadium, but now it was like it was coming from inside me. It was under my skin, like something was crawling through my veins, making my heart pound in a way that felt unnatural. I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop staring at Rihanna, but she wasn't Rihanna anymore. The woman on stage, the woman who had once been the embodiment of confidence and control, was gone. In her place stood someone, or something, else. Her body was jerking violently now, as though she had lost control of it, as though something else was moving her. I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't just the way she moved. It was the way she was, the way she felt in that moment. It wasn't just her body twisting and convulsing. It was like her presence had changed. The confidence, the command she normally had disappeared. Instead, what stood there on that stage was a vessel, a shell, a puppet. And the crowd? They were no longer reacting to her music, her performance. They were reacting to her movements. No, they were reacting to something else entirely. They were following her, like they were tethered to her. Like every breath she took, every movement she made, pulled them deeper into whatever ritual was unfolding before my eyes. My hands were still shaking. I could barely keep the camera steady. My heart was racing, but my body was paralyzed. I felt like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see, something I shouldn't be seeing, but I couldn't look away. I didn't know if I wanted to run or if I needed to stay. But deep down, I knew I had to document this. I had to capture it. And that's when I heard it. A voice, but it wasn't a voice that came from the speakers. It wasn't even Rihanna's voice. This voice was coming from somewhere else, from behind the stage, from the darkness that was creeping up on us. It was low at first, a whisper, but it grew louder and clearer as the performance went on. The voice, no, it wasn't a voice, it was an invocation. Words I couldn't understand. Words that seemed to resonate deep inside my chest. I could feel them, but I couldn't make sense of them. It was like a language I had never heard before, ancient and guttural. Every word seemed to reverberate through my body like it was calling me. But it wasn't just me. It was calling to everyone in that stadium, everyone in the crowd. They had stopped chanting along with Rihanna's performance and were now murmuring the same words under their breath, as if they were part of the same ritual, as if they were summoning something. And every time they spoke, every time they repeated that chant, I felt the air shift, grow heavier, more suffocating. It was like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. My breath was coming out in short, shallow gasps. I looked around the arena, my eyes darting between the stage and the crowd, trying to make sense of it all, trying to figure out if I was the only one who could feel this. But no one else seemed to notice. They were all too caught up in the chant, in the movement, in the energy that had taken over the entire stadium. Everyone was staring at Rihanna, but it was like their eyes weren't seeing her anymore. They were all looking past her, looking at something beyond her, something behind her. I felt it too, that pull. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it. The urge to step forward, to get closer, to be a part of whatever was happening. But I resisted. I knew I had to. I had to stay away. I had to keep the camera rolling. But deep down, I was terrified of what would happen if I did. The camera caught it all. The chanting, the swaying, the distortion, and the lights. And then, just as the intensity of the chanting reached its peak, something changed. The air cracked. The sound of the chanting stopped, and the stadium was thrown into sudden silence. For a brief moment, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and then the growl came back. But this time, it wasn't just a sound. It was physical. It was the ground beneath me, shaking. The lights flickered again, this time violently. And then, the shadows on the stage started to move. It wasn't the normal stage lighting casting them, no. This was something different. Something alive. The shadows on the walls, on the floor, twisted and writhed like they had their own purpose. I looked around, desperate to find some explanation, but there was no one else around to offer one. No one in the crew was reacting. They were still frozen in place, eyes wide, their bodies stiff. They weren't moving. And then, I saw something in the shadows. It wasn't just a shape. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was a figure, a being moving through the shadows, but it wasn't human. It was too tall, too unnatural in shape. It was blacker than the darkness around it, a void that stretched across the space. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel it. I could feel its presence. It was watching us, watching me. I turned away, desperate to focus on anything but that thing. I looked at Rihanna again. She was still on stage, her body jerking in unnatural movements. Her eyes were wide open, but there was nothing behind them. Nothing but darkness. She wasn't Rihanna anymore. She wasn't even herself. She had become a vessel for something else, something ancient, something that had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And then it happened. The stage lights went out completely, plunging the arena into darkness. But not total darkness. No, the shadows seemed to glow. They were alive, moving, stretching toward the crowd. The energy in the room had completely shifted. It wasn't just a performance anymore. This was something far beyond it. It was a summoning. The crowd was no longer cheering. They were chanting, but it wasn't the same chant. It was louder now, more urgent. They were repeating the words over and over, like they couldn't stop, like they had no choice. And that's when everything changed. The silence after the lights went out was unlike anything I've ever felt. It wasn't a quiet silence, not the peaceful kind you'd expect. No, this silence was thick. It felt heavy, suffocating. The kind of silence that makes your heart race and your thoughts freeze. The growl from earlier had stopped, but now there was just the steady, unsettling pulse in the air, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. For a moment, everything felt like it was suspended in time. I stood there, paralyzed, my camera still in my hands, but completely still. I wanted to run. I should have run, but my legs wouldn't move. The air was too heavy, too charged. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me, like it was closing in, wrapping around my chest, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't understand it, but I felt it, and I couldn't escape it. I couldn't ignore it. The crowd had stopped chanting. They were silent now, just standing there, staring at the stage. Their faces were frozen, blank, as if they were waiting for something. But they weren't reacting to the performance anymore. They weren't even reacting to Rihanna. They were waiting for something else, something that wasn't part of the show. And then I heard it again, the low, guttural growl. It wasn't just a sound. It was inside me. It was in the ground, in the walls, in my own chest. It was everywhere, and I could feel it vibrating through every bone in my body. My breath was shallow now, my heart pounding in my throat. The fear that had been building inside me erupted, and I realized then that I couldn't stay. I couldn't be in this room, in this space anymore. Whatever was happening, whatever was unfolding in front of me, it was too much. But before I could even think about moving, I saw something that stopped me cold. From the corner of my eye, I noticed one of the crew members. Someone I had worked with before, someone who had been calm, professional, earlier in the night, staring at the stage. But it wasn't the usual awe or focus you'd expect from someone watching a live show. No, this was different. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his mouth was slightly open. He wasn't reacting to what was happening on stage. He was seeing something else, something behind it. He was staring straight ahead, but his focus wasn't on Rihanna. His eyes were fixed, but not in the way someone focuses on something they care about. This was a different kind of stare, a stare that was empty, hollow. I wanted to call out to him, to ask if he was okay, but the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. It was like I was trapped in some kind of invisible cage, unable to reach out or do anything. But then I saw it. The shadows on the stage, the ones I had seen flicker earlier, they were moving again. Not in the usual way, not like the typical shift of light and dark. Number, these shadows were alive. They seemed to stretch and grow, reaching out like tendrils, growing toward the crowd, toward the staff. They weren't just moving, they were alive. They were crawling, slithering, winding their way through the space, creeping through the audience like they were looking for something or someone. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit it. But the shadows weren't just visual. They were physical. They were tangible. I could feel them as if they were wrapping around my body, as if they were drawing me in. I stumbled back, trying to get away from the stage, trying to get away from the darkness that seemed to be swallowing the arena whole. But every step I took, every inch I moved, it felt like the space was getting smaller, like the shadows were closing in around me. The air felt thick, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then I heard it. A voice. But it wasn't a voice from a person. It wasn't human. It came from somewhere else, from deep inside the chaos, deep inside the darkness. It was a low whisper at first, just a murmur. But then it grew louder. The voice wasn't speaking words I could understand, but I could feel it. It wasn't just coming through the air. It was coming from inside me, from inside everyone. And I realized something. The crowd wasn't silent because they were waiting for the next song. They were silent because they were being controlled. They were no longer themselves. The energy in the air wasn't just chaotic, it was manipulating them. It was shaping them into something else, something unnatural. I turned to leave, to get out, but when I reached for the door to the backstage area, it wouldn't open. I pushed against it, my hands shaking, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it shut. Something that didn't want me to leave. The crew members, the ones who had been standing still, who had been watching, started to move, but not in the usual way. They didn't walk toward the stage. They didn't go toward the exits. Number. They were moving toward the shadows, toward the growing darkness that seemed to be swallowing the arena. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't do anything. My body was paralyzed. Every inch of me was frozen in place, and I couldn't escape it. The whispers were growing louder now. The shadows were almost tangible. And then everything shifted. Travis. I hadn't seen him move from his position on stage, but now, as the energy in the room shifted, he stepped forward, his body jerking in a way that was unnatural. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at the crowd. His eyes were closed, but his hands were raised, like he was commanding something, like he was leading this darkness, this ritual. And that's when I saw it. The figure. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just an illusion. It was real, a figure, tall, twisted, moved from behind the stage. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it. It wasn't human. It wasn't supposed to be there. That's when I finally understood. This wasn't just a show. It wasn't just a concert. It was a ritual. And whatever had been summoned that night was here. It was already inside the stadium, and I had witnessed it. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. I still hear it sometimes, late at night, the low hum, the sound of something stirring in the dark. It's not just a memory, it's alive, like it's still waiting, still watching me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to escape it. Every shadow feels like it's reaching for me. Every flicker of light reminds me of what I saw that night. I can feel it deep down in my bones. The thing that was summoned isn't gone. It's still out there. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can hear it calling my name. If I vanish, if you never hear from me again, you'll know why.